Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 23rd of December 2018. I should start off by mentioning that, remember, you can buy the books and discs I have for sale at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and you'll find out on the website how to order them. There's also lots of discs as well of the shows I've done over years and years and years, and you can order them too if you want to. But the thing is too, that's what keeps me ticking over. I don't sell all kinds of gimmickry stuff and so on. I don't have any sponsors behind me, and if I did have, I'd be altering the format, because you'll have demands and stipulations and forms of censorship, in a sense, if you start getting backed by companies and corporations. That goes with the territory. Therefore, I don't have all that, and things are rapidly being tightened up across the board as the end of the so-called free or open internet is pretty well over, as they draw the net, the strings of the net at the top, the drawstrings in, and all their little freebies, etc., that you once had have been taken away from you. These were, of course, meant to bring you in. You're living through, always remember, a preordained, planned system where those in authority, and you always have a group in authority that are there before you're born, and generally before that your parents are born, who plan the future. That's how it's always been done. There's never been an intention of allowing something else to just arise spontaneously and take it over and change the system, even though they'll change the format and make it appear that a different kind, or even far left or something, are taken over, or far right for that matter. Nothing's further from the truth, because the system's meant to fool the public more than anybody else, not countries and so on. Countries have the same dominant minorities ahead of them too, with lots of intelligence agencies and services serving them and keeping them up to date on what's happening. So don't think for a minute that somehow that there are different players here trying to take over. Everything that you see is planned. The gender wars, racial wars, etc., all kinds of any little difference that can be, where you can get a wedge in and start widening the wedge and causing conflict and anger or even hatred, is being used to the maximum by very powerful agencies, way above anything you're told about. Really way above what you're told about, or what your nation even declares it even has. And agencies that you do have, you have to really ask, what are they really? What is the CIA, for instance? What is MI6? What are all the big agencies? What are they really? Who do they serve? And you'll never get the real answer. You get clues, and little bits you'll collect along your whole lifetime of reading bits and pieces. But the fact is, you'll never get admissions to things at that level, because you're trained to believe in a different system. I've said it so many times. And kept naive. You're trained to be naive and to believe in this, what they tell you is a system. And you're therefore, when they change even the whole idea of genders and so on, and make you conform to this belief by law, etc., and pressure, you will adapt to it all, because you will not question your own interpretation. You'll start to doubt yourself if you go against the grain. That's how you're trained to be. And most folk are trained to go along with the flow, because there's less conflict for themselves, less hassle. And work-wise, or even through school, they'll probably get a much better grade if they go along with the flow. There's nothing real or nice about this system. Nothing at all. There really isn't. Any decency you find in life is from other people, just helping each other out, etc., etc. That's the decency you get. But when it comes to government or government agencies and the massive barrage, armies and armies of non-governmental organizations paid by your tax money, coupled with private foundations and so on, running your life for you, these guys won't help you out. These guys are all on board with the same agenda. And often, I really think, controlled by the same capstone, you might say. That's the real world that we live in. So, and it's good to see that even my many talks over many years has paid off, because lots of people copy the stuff, use it. They never mention where they get it, but and some of the big ones too, quite a few of the big ones actually. But the fact that they'll use the same terminology that I use, and they'll say it verbatim from my talks. It lets me know where they get it from, and lots of other people realize this too. But here's the thing about it too. Remember that because I don't sell all kinds of products, I don't take advertising and so on, that it's up to you, the listeners, to keep me just ticking along here. I'm not wealthy at all, and I don't bring in much money, and I tallied up what I got in for December here, and it's about 30% of what I brought in previous Decembers. That's what's keeping me going here, which is very little at all. Now, I know that people are finding it hard these days with the cost of living going up, and the austerity measures, as they call it, in the higher level, that's what they call it, being forced upon you with higher even food prices, especially in Canada. It's ridiculous now. And it's all sanctioned by government for the food, etc. They go up and up and up as we get trained to get off meat and everything else. But most folk can't even afford meat. That's the class I'm in right now. Seriously. And but the thing is, it's getting so bad with everything going up and up and up. And people have, again, everything is relative when it comes to how well off or poor a person is, isn't it? I mean, some people will say that they're struggling when they're maybe buying a second house and stuff like that. And I'm not kidding you. I sometimes get that from people that used to even donate at one time. And they'll say that they're getting a new house or whatever happens to be. And I guess they must think that you live in the same circumstances as they do. So to them, they're struggling, or a little bit of poverty, or what they'll call poverty, which to me would be nothing at all. I wouldn't even consider it even austerity, or poverty. But it depends on how other folks see their own situation. We're all different. I survive on very little, and I've got all these different websites to keep going and so on. And I refuse a lot of interviews to go on big shows, because I don't want to be taken over, basically. I won't play games with interviewing, go along with things. I get offers all the time to go along with certain things. I don't take them at all. And that's why you end up in the poor boat, you might say. I don't go into politics. I don't back anybody because it's all bogus. All politics is bogus. It's been bogus before I was born, across the Western world especially. But it's better run in the sense that you're taught, you have better methods of indoctrination to make you believe it's all real and above board and it's all there for you. Until you, like the UK for instance, the people vote to leave this European Union monstrosity, even though the idea went along as a very old idea based in London again by the same group that wanted a world governmental system run by themselves, bankers and experts. The Milner Group, Royal Institute for International Affairs, etc. And these were the guys who said that wars would be necessary to bring folk to their knees and make them simply give up sovereignty and be quite glad to join these, what they would call free trade zones and amalgamations, basically. So but regardless, the people in Britain voted at least to leave this Brexit deal, but it's been completely ignored by those in power and installed. And if anything comes out of it at all, it'll be some weak nonsense that won't change a darn thing for the situation of Britain. Although I personally am convinced that I think the whole of Europe's pretty well, maybe not the whole of Europe, but a good part of Europe's gone already with the incredible burdens on mass migrations has been taken in for years and years and years under a big agenda pushed by all politicians. And I mean all politicians of all parties. Before I was even born, up to the present time, and it's got worse and worse and worse. And it's a welfare state. You cannot support mass unemployment in your own countries and welfare systems for folk who are losing their jobs and so on when you're bringing in millions of more people and putting them up on the tax bill. How many folk are left working to pay for all this? I mean, it's ridiculous. Don't forget that poverty and socialism is nothing more than a form of controlling people. That's what it is control. And the one thing that the Milner Group and the Royal Institute for International Affairs and all the different scientific groups that belong to them too, like the Royal Society, they have always talked about eugenics. They're always talking about, the terrible population problem, all the way from Darwin to the present day, and the Galtons and so on, and how it'd bring down the population of the world, and that the world would be much better run by experts. They would use democracy as a battering ram for their wars, basically. But they had no intention of actually giving it to you. But they must make you believe that you got it. As I say, it's not until you get a vote on something, or you want to vote on something, and you're not allowed to have the vote, or your vote's ignored, that you realise you don't have a democracy at all. That's how bad it really is. So see, I go into all these things in my talks for years and years and years, and I'm telling you, everybody's using the stuff that I put up. There's so much of it. I mean, it's an archive. But as I say, they never mention where they get their stuff from. Although I know where it's from, and other folk know it as well. But you don't get any financial reward, even just to keep you ticking over here. And it won't last forever. When I was crawling along before, and now it's 30% less. So that's okay. It's a message to me as well, perhaps. Because things change. Things do change. If you want the books and discs, etc., or to donate, just go into the Cutting Through the Matrix website, and you can go into alanwattssentinel.eu as well. You can donate there as well. You'll find out how to do it. You'll see all the other sites I have. They're all listed on my official site, cuttingthroughmatrix.com. Anything else you see is not actually mine. And anything sold is only through my websites. Put it that way. There've been a lot of fake ones out there in the past. So you have no idea of what you really are up against when you're telling the basic truth. And yes, you will sacrifice a lot of stuff. Maybe even, it doesn't do anything for your health either. But you'll definitely sacrifice in every way if you want to get the truth out there. Now, the system is changing so fast, as I knew it always would, because you realize you've been born into a war zone. And you didn't know there was a war declared upon you. No one told you. You're taught to believe it's all quite normal. Everything's normal. Even the changes you see must be normal because they're told that they're normal. In fact, you're told there's something wrong with you if you don't accept them. And these are mass, not just experiments with mass psychology being used. Don't forget that psychology, and that's why I don't run after psychology. I understand psychology and psychiatry, but I don't run after them promoting it as some kind of religion, because that's what it is. It was designed to take over and replace religions with philosophies to try to give meaning to human life and the human mind. And they're simply as totalitarian as anything else. And if actually they're worse than anything that ever went before them, don't forget that psychology and humanism is what communism used. Don't forget about that. That's what was pushed, is the right to change everything, was that the old system must be destroyed completely in the old religions, and in comes the new, where man's will, he'd be godlike with his own will, basically, and he could recreate the world as he saw fit. Well, who is he that they're always talking about? It certainly isn't you. And we know the mass slaughters that the Bolsheviks brought in, and then the communists all the way up through a good part of the 20th century. We all lived through, a lot of us lived through it. And there's much, much more horror to be eventually unfolded to society as more things are disclosed to them, but it's bad enough what we know already. Never mind the wars that your own countries have been fomenting all through the 20th century up to the present time, because we're still fomenting wars across the world. And no one asks, well, the folk ask, I must admit, people ask, what on earth are we doing all over the planet? What's Britain even doing over the planet and helping with all this stuff? What is NATO anymore? And what is, the amount of bases you can't even keep up with that the US has today across the planet. That used to be Britain's job during the 19th century and into the early 20th century. But they were bankrupt with World War I and II and all the wars that they had before it. Don't forget, all these wars before it were paid by the taxpayer and still be paid by the taxpayer, because you can't pay your way out of compound interest. It's not meant to be paid off completely. It's a control mechanism. And they decided to get the US to take over and push the same agenda. And the US is, well, we're not in any real tangible currency anymore. And so it's the same kind of thing, where your dollar's worth less and less and less. And you've got a small gang in charge of your central banking system, same as London, and across the world. An international gang that run it all through the World Bank and all the central banks and IMF, that's what runs your world, basically. They do awfully well for themselves. They don't pay taxes either, these folk. It's rather astonishing, isn't it? Christine Lagarde at the IMF has been there for years and doesn't pay taxes, but you all do. You pay money to all these international organizations, and you don't even know it. No one's asked you in your so-called democracies, do you mind? But then, in your democracies, you're not asked about if you mind anything you're paying out for. That's what they call democracy. What a farce. Absolute farce. But these are the times in which we live, as I say, where you're trained to believe and be naive. Why would anyone want to do harm above you? You've met such nice people, haven't you, in authority? They're always nice to you. Actually, they're getting worse all the time. I think they're getting less even with their tempers when the public demand or to know or have something done to their public servants, supposedly. And they're quickly put in their place now, just to where they stand. And their public servants are way, way above them now, apparently, in their attitudes, etc. And all your electronic gadgetry, as I say, has been pulled in gradually. This is not new, though. They publish so many articles. They always tell you what they're going to do. And people forget, because you're constantly given more trash to examine your entire life long. Like a machine that just turns it out, chug, 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 you know. But way back in the late 90s especially, they were going through all the information warfare that would happen if they ever gave the people free access to discuss things across the planet, or even within their own countries with each other. Oh, how chaotic it would be. The order would be smashed, yada, yada, yada. And this was augmented by the big magicians that pushed the internet and saying, oh my God, it's for the people, it is the people's, you're part of it, it's all yours, etc. Nothing was further from the truth. But the ones who talked about the fact they would never lose control were the big intelligence agencies. They didn't sit back and let things happen. Before they wrote the articles, I'm sure 20 years before that, or 30, they'd already planned what they were going to do. The idea was to get everybody onto this system. That's why in the 90s, there's so much pornography on it. All the papers heralded this stuff. That's all you would know about it. My God, there's all this pornography to attract them in. I can remember my local library at the time where I was living. They got the computers in, and if I went in there at all during a weekday, you'd see them crowded at the school break time or the lunch hour. And I said, what are these children doing? You know, she said, they're flooding in and all excited. He says, they come in there and try to get in to look at the porn. So all this publicity about the pornography was working awfully well. All the kids knew about it. And they were the ones raised with this stuff. Raised with it. And often now they're utterly addicted to it. And at the same time they'd planned the future for television and how all the stuff to do with segments of society, so select segments you might say, that were taboo before would be included in all the upcoming shows and so on, and eventually mandatorily written into every script eventually, which today it all is. And I don't watch TV, but I talk to folk and I've talked to some folk who haven't watched TV for years, who have tried like a free month or something or other, and that they're bowled over how everything now is in your face. All this stuff that was at one time discussed by specific cultural change organizations that were designed in a warfare fashion to destroy the Western society are all up front now. There's nothing hidden at all. It's all right up there getting pushed like you wouldn't believe. Right on schedule. Step by step to the present as they go forward and forward and forward to destroy all of what was. All the old system of culture. The culture of the West had to be smashed completely. The family had to be totally annihilated. That's been one of the big ones since even the 1800s. H.G. Wells is a big proponent for that, for everybody else to be smashed, but not his own. He had a few different wives. Because they believe that themselves at the top are the only ones who should be breeding, but the ones at the bottom should just go down quietly over a generation or so, just die off, not breed or abort, or just pick mates who can't conceive, obviously, etc., etc., etc. And here you are living on a schedule written about copiously in the past. Nothing hidden, by the bigwigs and the big organisations that now rule the entire system. All out, but no one cares now. Because along with it became the behaviourists and psychologists to train. It was all quite natural this should happen. That somehow it's a kind of societal evolution. Really. It's an evolution, eh? It's an evolution that actually would take you backwards in a system to a time where barbarity was normal and there were no such thing as taking care of each other or having children or whatever. They might have children, but they don't look after them. That's where you're going back to. That was like that not long ago, actually, in the 1700s and 1800s. You look at the poverty across most of the countries in Europe, especially Britain. That was one of the worst ones. Called the sick man of Europe, because the incredible poverty, any visitor to the country saw it. They destroyed the folk who lived on the land at one time, got them off the land, just like they're doing now with Agenda 21, and crammed them in the cities at that time that they'd thrown up to be industrial cities. And so the big bankers who owned the massive factories would rake in fortunes with the cheapest labour possible. No restrictions on how you would take care of them or abuse them or work them to death or pay them wages which would even feed them. And that was Great Britain. Right up into the height of its empire. And when they brought in the first charitable institutions by decree, it was because of the complaints of other countries who couldn't stand the terrible sufferings of the people in Britain, believe it or not. This system is designed, you'll have a small clique, a relatively small clique of incredibly rich people. Britain had a decent-sized middle class, you might say, but it was still small in comparison with the rest of the population, right up into the 20th century. And the middle class, really, for Britain, were the ones, maybe you'd call them the lucky ones, but they were devoted to the system because they got their bread and butter, more bread and butter than anybody else down below them. And they were given certain privileges, because if Britain believes in a system of privileges, by the way, that is the system that runs the world. They pretend it's some kind of humanitarian cause, and if you're brought into the right societies, you see, in the right circles of influence, you'll serve those circles of influence because you're serving the nations and the world as they stuff their pockets with the loot that they get. They make sure they've got incredible incomes for themselves. But this is the real system, folks, that you have to serve. You're in service to the world. This private, secretive organization. It's not so secretive in a sense if you dare to open some of the thicker books. That's what it is. The Milner Group was based as a secret society in their own writings. And the Cecil Rhodes Bunch as well. They amalgamated with Rothschilds, and it's in the will of Cecil Rhodes. You can see who he left his money from, who he left it to, I should say. It's interesting to see how they planned it all, but the system also already existed in their days. They knew that. It already existed. They were the latest level, you might say, of this system to set up a system of world control. That's what it was. And you're living through it today. But yes, those who serve it will get more privileges. And at one time they had an unlimited poor folk across Europe, especially the UK too, who would always fill uniforms and go across the waters and get, to slaughter and get slaughtered. And by the way, they've used the same technique in Africa through United Nations with different countries wearing their little blue helmets from African countries and going policing other ones and slaughtering there as well. People who are abused in every possible way, who've lived in fear and terror and hunger combined, make great soldiers. They'll do what they're told because now they're getting a little bit more, and they'll react violently to any threat to themselves, like all abused people generally do. And that becomes rather horrific when they're let loose on people. And part of the problem today is that the troops that are used for NATO, and other countries with the same problem too, are not part of NATO, but the ones who are used constantly over and over again with tours and tours and tours, they don't get discharged after 2 or 3 tours or whatever. They stay on, and they're drugged to death. They're drugged to death to cope with the craziness of a lifestyle that makes no sense to them. Because the hardest thing is bad enough when you're brainwashed and you believe you're in a just war. That's bad enough. When you've got a good white hats and bad hats type thing. But when you have no moral reason and no good propaganda to back up why you're in a country, you might go to pieces because you're basically a mercenary, and you'll start to realize that. The big boys at the top know it, and that's why they drug them. When you're killing folk in a situation that seems hopeless, that you're not going to change their system, and it's obvious too that it's not intended that you're going to change their system, but you're supposed to go out there and risk your life every day. You'll start to crack up, you see, unless you take their drugs. Some of these soldiers over the years have come out with amazing testimonies that they're walking through day to day in a kind of drug daze. Some of them hallucinate the drugs. Well, is that a caring system that sends you off like that? I don't think so. But folk are finding it harder and harder to try and justify any of the modern wars that they're involved. And again, don't forget that George Orwell, who knew this agenda was coming up, and he met in with the top characters, the Huxleys, and so he met them all, and he knew them well, and he knew the elite who planned this kind of future. Members of the Milner Society, Royal Institute for International Affairs, he knew them. He knew the internationalists in Britain who were at the top of the tree, lords, etc., lords of this and lords of that, who were helping to finance the Russian Revolution, communism. And that's why he wrote 1984 with lots of the clues embedded in it. And that wars are not meant to be won, they're meant to be kept going and going and going. And that the system that will take all your rights away from you in warfare, like, and you got Big Brother, you see, Big Brother, you have no rights, we can't allow you to have freedoms, you could be a spy, you might become a terrorist, etc., etc., which we've all been told in mainstream media, as they quote our betters above us. And they've trained the public since 2001, and it was planned before it, but I'm talking about the taking away your rights was planned before it. Canada brought in the Omnibus Crime Bill, which is really a terrorist bill, in 1998. And the reporters back then were astonished, genuinely astonished, and wrote about it, said, what is this? We're not at war with anybody. Well, 3 years later, we're not at war, no. You've got policing actions, like Orwell said, you know. So it's all changes of terminology. We send peacekeepers out. We don't send soldiers out. We send peacekeepers out. Because we're not at war, right? This is all for the public's consumption, this terminology, really. Most of the propaganda you get is meant for domestic consumption. If they lose a domestic base, then they've lost any kind of war against anybody else. So they must give you the basic, simple propaganda that so-and-so's a bad man in charge of the evil empire, etc. And that's why they use the same terms over and over when they pick new targets. Why change the formulas when the last ones worked so well? But it is true. It's awfully true. Many in the armed forces have realized it too as they mature. You don't mature, unfortunately, when you're in the armed forces. You're kind of stuck in a limbo situation while you work out reality. And if you survive in these days today and look back, eventually you'll either go through a kind of cracking up phase as the indoctrination wears off and you start to see what on earth was I really doing and to whom. And pictures and images will come back to you of what happened. And hopefully then you'll start to mature. You'll not crack up, hopefully, but you'll start to mature and start to be honest. It's a hard thing for people who even commit atrocities to start to admit it, that this wasn't a so-and-so or so-and-so and so-and-so, but it was actually an atrocity. It's a hard thing for people to do that. It's very difficult. And it also causes a kind of a crisis in their identity as what they are. I'm a decent person, I'm not bad, blah, blah, blah. And yet you get that impasse where you did bad things with families who are terrified, pooping themselves, and you're aiming guns at their heads as you bash their doors in, and so on. That's already come out, a lot of this stuff, but everybody's been used. In UK at one time in Britain, you would join up and go across to whatever battles they were fighting at that time. There was battle after battle after battle with all different countries. And it was all from the poor folk. The poor folk actually from orphanages. The orphanages were a great place to, and that's why they actually started to create orphanages and fund them, and before Victoria actually, but just before her, and then she sanctioned them, because it literally bred regiments It turned to be the regiments eventually of soldiers who were pulled out of utter death by starvation and so on, given clean uniforms eventually, given a little bit. Remember that saying, you be all you can be a somebody, meaning you're nobody. What do you, if you're going to be a somebody, that obviously they're telling you you're nobody right now. And you see that to orphans at that time, who are told that they were born from worthless parents or a parent, etc., etc. And the orphanages, by the way, and the poorhouses were not put up to help people. It was made quite clear. It was meant to scare and terrify the general population into accepting any work possible. That's a fact, folks. That's real history. They created the mass armies that were used to go across the planet. And if you get them out of those conditions and give them be a somebody, and you've suddenly got some kind of respect because you've got a uniform on. Your brain's no better, but you've got a uniform on. So you're now a somebody. Then those guys would do everything they were told to do, wherever they were told to do. And if you got them out of deprived areas of poverty, where you're constantly living in anxiety and almost hysteria and facing death all the time with starvation or whatever, because there was no welfare at all in those days, then these are the best troops, because they'll go out and whatever it is, they'll fight to the last and they'll slaughter whoever's, because their adrenaline will go much, much higher than anybody else's. It's innate with the abuse system. I hate to say all this, but it's true. And that's how they've been used and they're still being used to the present day. But now they give them drugs because you can't rationalize to most of them why they're in countries that haven't invaded them. And they're across the world. And they read the same papers and they didn't know the fallout from the so-called mass migrations, they call them, as the folk try to flee these areas. And they're getting guided, and I mean guided and directed and funded to go towards Europe. A lot of them are catching on. And when things don't make sense and start to override your basic propaganda, then you'll crack up. That's what's happening. That's what's happening, folks. But that's just that one part of it. And I say, out of it comes, as I say, a completely surveilled society. And until the people right now, today, most of them have accepted it already, and they think it's now normal. They normalize everything. People fought revolutions to privacy from their dominant minorities that ruled over them. It took a long time to get any rights at all. And we've watched them give it all up without a struggle. And the big boys haven't finished with you yet. They haven't. I've mentioned before, long before all the trouble with Facebook, that these were all front organizations for the big global intelligence agency that runs everything. And now it's coming out, but folk still use a darn thing. They use Facebook. And they've even trained the younger generation. Well, it doesn't matter. They know all about me anyway. I've got nothing to hide. What does it matter? It's so sad you can't get a time machine, get a few folk from the past that went through incredible tyranny, bring them back and tell them why it matters. But isn't it incredible science through behaviorism and study and psychology to give you so much entertainment? So that really, if you get a little bit stressed, and they train you to literally avoid anything which depresses you or makes you feel unsettled, avoid it at all costs. Look for the happy things. Look for fun things. Isn't that what all the talk show folks say on TV? The hosts they give you for television. Well, be happy. Just be, like it's a switch. Be happy. Don't look at that as negative. Don't go around people who are negative. Really? Well, guess what? As I say, if you're walking along a train track, don't wear earphones that are playing happy music, because someone might just come up behind you and you aren't going to notice. In real life, you have to be aware of as many things as you can. It doesn't mean you become neurotic. It doesn't mean you dwell on it and obsess on them. It doesn't mean that at all. But at least be aware of things. It's called common sense. And common sense is not avoiding things because certain things are unpleasant. I can remember years ago when they had a big ice storm in Quebec, and Canada was awfully slow to react, the governments and authorities and so on. And then when they did react, they said, oh, we've got to fly out, all the electricity's down, and pylons of electric pylons are all pulled down and so on. Well, you see, Quebec had one of the biggest, they have the biggest hydroelectric systems there, and they had encouraged over many years the people to start using electricity. It was going to be so cheap, so cheap, so cheap. And apparently, Pierre Trudeau at one time, the dad of the present Prime Minister, was pushing the whole project when he was in office, then saying that it'd be pennies, leave your lights on all night, it's going to be so darn cheap in the future. But again, politicians, if you haven't learned by now, tell you an awful lot of lies. But anyway, a lot of the folk had gone on to electricity, down in the pylons, and the folk were freezing, middle of winter, big ice storms. And a lot of them had no other means of heat. So here's the government making literally, the government that throws billions across the planet, by the way, of taxpayers' money, telling folk to donate generators, to give them heat and so on, electric fires and all kinds of things, blah, blah, blah. And this went on for a couple of months at least. The aftermath was pretty awful. And so there you are. I mean, anybody with a bit of, and there's lots of Quebecers who wouldn't fall for the electric thing too. They had other means for a bad day. A bad day might come, so let's have that kerosene heater and so much kerosene, etc., etc., etc. And store up some food and too, because the folk couldn't get out and move. That's common sense. That's called common sense. I'm sure that lots of the folks say, oh, I think we're so well taken care of now, things will never go bad and nasty. We're wrapped in cotton wool. In other words, the real socialists who believe in eternal childhood and utopia being managed by experts, you know, a lot of them had nothing, absolutely nothing. That's common sense. So this nonsense, don't look at the folk who are warning you about certain things. That's dangerous. But as I say, it doesn't mean that you fall for everything that comes along. Just don't go into under the table quivering about things. Just use common sense. It's not difficult. You use common sense when you cross the road, don't you? Is that being negative that you look before you cross? I don't think so. You're taught don't look at negative stuff because the system that rules you wants you to be completely obedient to what your masters tell you. And they don't want you listening to anything or looking into anything that may be contrary to what you're being brainwashed with by your owners. I call them owners, actually, because after all, they own the system. I can say, too, that no politician is going to be presented to the general public that's ever going to change anything in this system. In this system. It won't happen. There's a massive machine that runs the system, and it has front organizations, and they call them political parties. That's part of the trick. Not all of it. It's a small part of the trick, actually. But the agenda is right in your face. Elimination of nations. Reducing you eventually to basically subsistence states across the planet. Or eventually with ration cards, not kidding you. They will call it something else, it'll be called credits or something, like Bertrand Russell said it would be. He was all for that system. You can't save them up, you have to use them. But the system at the top, which let's just call it government, or the state, or whatever it happens to be, will issue them, and you can pay your rent. And you can buy your food. And if you don't comply, he said this back in the 40s and 50s in his books. He said that if you didn't do what you're told and accept the system that they were telling you about, or you complained about it, or anything like that, you'd be punished. They wouldn't issue your credits that week or that month, and you couldn't pay your rent, you couldn't feed yourself, and they could bring you to your knees until you complied. He's talking about political correctness, folks, if you didn't quite get it. That's how old, it's much, much older than that. But he wrote about it. He was part of the planning of it in his day. This is the part that we're going through right now. And you'll hear what I'm saying shortly by other folk, probably this week. But that's really the system that we're living in. I'm not kidding you. You know, so take it to the bank that the government of every other nation is in on the same big plan. That's true. And the old enemy game is very, very old. Let's be honest here. They're on about China, China, China. Well, it was the West that created China, present-day China. We financed them from the beginning through the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Whenever even the Soviet Union, we fund them from the Bolshevik era right to the present day. Through the World Bank and IMF. And we were all put down as guarantors to pay off the loans they would default on. How's that, eh? How's that? Vastly different reality than the one we're brainwashed with, isn't it? China didn't take all our jobs from us. It was the West and the big bankers in London, especially, and the groups that run the system, the Royal Institute for International Affairs and CFR, that set up the GATT Treaty and the World Trade Organization, and gave basically China the right to start bringing in the companies from the West. Our tax money, I did talks on this from the official governmental papers on it, where our tax money was used to transfer factories over to China over the last 25, 30 years, and speeding up for the last 20, but transfer them over to China. We paid for them to uproot and move to China and build in China, and we paid for up to 15 years for each company till they claimed they started to make a profit. Were you asked about that? Were you asked about, do you mind having been unemployed in your own countries and it all getting shipped over to China? Of course you weren't. But now, supposedly China's your big scary enemy now. Ooh. Well, I'll tell you one thing, the guys who run China are the same bunch that run you. Yes, they are. That's the reality of it. If they're on the same system of currency, money, manipulation, etc., it's the same clique that runs the whole thing. And this nonsense about, oh my God, there could be a potential enemy. Well, let's be honest here. Are we ready to start building or making our own stuff back at home again? Of course we're not. The system is now so designed that if you even try to create the basic necessities that you're buying from China in your own countries, the workers couldn't even afford the taxes. And now we're the employees, but they wouldn't afford the taxes to make them and even buy them. If you made them in your own country, you couldn't pay your workers enough money because the end product would be so expensive now. Because we pay so much in taxes, incredible taxes. And we also pay incredible prices for everything that we need, including food now. It's all planned that way, obviously. There's no such thing as, oh, we didn't realize this would happen when we came up with this free trade deal. We had no idea. Oh, they knew, and they published what they knew. If anybody cared to read it. Well, here's a few articles just for anybody who wants to look up on stuff that's still a lot. Isn't it astonishing where they can announce things? You can read it, and they might say you're a conspiracy theorist when you read their stuff. Isn't that amazing, eh? It depends who you are, though, doesn't it? But that's the way things really are in the real world. Now, here's some stuff here to do with weather. I mean, at one time, too, and I read the articles years ago, and there's books, awfully good books, written about people who worked at setting up the weather networks and where they would give you 24-hour-a-day weather, for goodness sake. That was a laugh 20 years ago. I mean, who would want to watch this stuff every day, unless you're really neurotic? And they've made it that way, but it was set up initially, all these different ones, to terrify the public that rain wasn't rain anymore. Every little rainfall was going to be a storm, and if you got a little bit of snow, it was going to be incredible whiteout or whatever. And that's what we've got now. At one time, we used to get winters in Canada. Now we get polar vortexes. You just change the name until it sounds terrifying. Oh my God! And you go. The beauty too is when a lot of the countries moved to centimeters instead of inches. I mean, at one time, an inch of snow or 2 inches of snow sounded, nothing at all. But you convert it into centimetre. Oh my God, that's a bigger number. In your head, it sounds worse, you see. So simple, the tricks that are played, they're really so simple. And that's the way it really is. We've always had climate change because that's what climate does. It changes. That's why you used to have weather. We defined it was going to be the next day. It's going to change. And we had seasons. The seasons were not clockwork. Like every day it starts at bang, that's when then the leaves turn brown that day, boom. Sometimes it would take weeks before they would change for the fall, etc., etc. Other times it would be much earlier. That's how it's always been. But of course nothing is done for the purpose the purpose of terrifying you, so you'll give more of your money away into austerity to save the planet. And the money will go to Al Gore and all these guys, the guys who set up the carbon exchanges. Isn't that wonderful, eh? How we're ripped off and ripped off. Here's an article here, and it's to do with, it was from CBS News, I think it was. Controversial spraying method aims to curb global warming. Now, I've mentioned before, they always discuss these things every year and give us little trial balloons to see if anybody's really noticing it. when they're actually doing it, they'll say they're going to try this and try that. Controversial spraying method aims to curb global warming. They'll release the same article every year to see how we accept it or if we care anymore. So a fleet of 100 planes making 4,000 worldwide missions per year could help save the world from climate change, it says here. Also, it may be relatively cheap. That's in conclusion of a new peer-grouped study in Environmental Research Letters. You could read the same article every year, folks. I've read them for years because the whole idea is to get you used to it. They're going to think about doing it. If they did that, it's the stuff of science fiction, but plain spraying tiny sulfate particles into the lower stratosphere, which is bad for your lungs, naturally, kill a lot of folk off. And it is actually working to kill folk off, around 60,000 feet up. So they're actually about 40 most of the time. It says the idea is to help shield the Earth from just enough sunlight to help keep temperatures low. You see? Now this is presented as news. It's not news. It's not news. But the same organisations release it every year to see what you think of it as you're being sprayed since 1998 every day. So their researchers, who's the researcher? Their researchers examined how practical and costly a hypothetical solar geoengineering project would be beginning 15 years from now. Oh, 15 years from now. The aim would be to half the temperature increase caused by heat-trapping greenhouse gases. See? It says in 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines. It was the second largest eruption in the 20th century, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. So that helped to cool it, they claim. Well, we've had lots before that too. But anyway, if they ever do this, they're saying, right? And if you say that they're already doing it, because your own eyes can tell, you've been watching it for years now, and lots of you have already have lung problems with the fallout from this. A lot of trees died off too, because it was aluminum oxide also and barium they were putting into it as well as the sulfur. But here you go. I'll put this article up for those who care about it. Most folk don't care anymore. All they need is Big Brother to say, here's a good movie to watch, just be happy. And that's it. Most of your thinking time, your time you've got to think, frightens people now. Because there's so much it could scare them if they've never looked at it before in any serious, determined effort, that is. So they will take anything that's offered to, I'll watch that, that'll divert me for another hour and a half, 2 hours, you see. That's how it works. Also, China and Russia are working together to heat the atmosphere to cut off satellite communications in terrifying war game experiment. That's Mail Online, the Daily Mail. The project, the claim, has potential military applications that can disrupt satellite communications, distinct advantage in the event of war or espionage. Now, it's basic HARP stuff they're using, folks. And it hits the ionosphere. It causes basically an aurora borealis effect. I've seen it for years when they're doing it. And it also cuts out shortwave and different radio, especially on the shortwave bands. It really has a terrible effect on them. And it's been done recently in the last couple of weeks. I noticed that at night. And I had the walls, I call it the walls of light going up towards the northeast. But all the countries have this stuff, and it's old stuff. And they have the HARP technology from Alaska that they now have all over the country in the US and Canada. And every other country has got the same thing anyway. So there you go. It can do a lot more than just what they're telling there. They had lots of good stuff admitted to years ago by the projects from HARP, for instance, that they could actually use it as a kind of radar too, and even see deep inside the earth for hidden places for other countries, in fact, where they're going to have elite surviving under bunkers and all that kind of stuff, But there's so much involved in all of this, but it's the same stuff they're talking about here. But when they mention China and Russia, oh my God, they've got this. They don't mention that we had it long, long before that. This other article here too is to do with award-winning journalist Klaas Relotius, who worked for Der Spiegel magazine, German magazine, big magazine, wrote fake news, and often bad stuff about the US. It was all fake. It sold well, etc. He got lots of awards for doing all his lies. But he's only one, mind you, and I don't know how he fell out of favour, because otherwise they'd have covered him, and he must have done something wrong to get turned on. But because writing fake news is not doing something wrong, they're paid to do it these days. No, there's no real people going out there and finding what news is all about anymore. And Jordan Pilger did awfully good articles on that years ago, and up to the present time, there are no real reporters today going out and finding out across the world what's really going on. That's the problem. It's all run by intelligence services, by its handouts to them. And lots of them are embedded intelligence agents within the media. That's old stuff, that. They've been there that came out even in the 70s and 80s. In the US, Britain was obvious for a lot of people who noticed it. They've always been there. All countries use it. Also, this one here is to do with Charles Michel, Belgian Prime Minister, resigned on Tuesday night after his government collapsed in the face of virulent opposition to his signing of a UN migration pact from his erstwhile coalition partners. And apparently 100-odd countries signed on to this UN agreement to take on more migrants. Because the idea now is to eliminate borders. It's now their agenda through free trade and then amalgamation of countries into clumps like the European Union and the Far Eastern conglomeration, the North American conglomeration, and now it's time to eliminate the borders as well. And have, part of that whole pact for free trade has been signed on to and updated. It always has, and the free flow, it used to be a flow of labour, now it's just free flow of people. You can read it yourselves if you care to look it up and see that. This guy resigned because the people in his country, a small country, it's not a big country, Belgium, and they have had enough of trying to fight for their own. There's ethnic groups within Belgium, in fact, that have been kind of vying with each other for well over 100 years, and they don't want outsiders now to come in and even muddy those waters. And I don't think they can afford it either. Who can afford it all in today's economic climate? Because you have to put them all up and pay for it all. And it takes a lot of stuff to put them up, and renting and all that kind of stuff, and healthcare and yada, 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 yada. It's a war, you see, and it's not the people who are coming in that's causing the war. It's the agenda at the top and the agencies that are actually paying some of them to come in and telling them where to go and how to come into the country in the first place and what exactly to say to get admission, etc., etc. It's all legalities put out by the United Nations and NGOs and big foundations at the top. And here's an article here too to do with Donald Trump's Syria withdrawal could reverberate for years. Here's the Guardian. You'll notice that it's really the left wing now, or what seems to be the left wing, for those who still believe in it, and that is, they're all for the continued wars across the world, etc. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed? Then they put in radical feminists in charge of some things too, and they're some of the worst warmongers. Why is that? Huh? Why? Don't you think they're all put there on purpose as a form of disguising the fact they're really agents for the big system? And Obama was the same. They put him in and said, it's going to be different. By God, he had more wars on the go. Again, democratic, liberal. Interesting, eh? So anyway, here they are. Here's the Guardian. The Guardian used to at one time was fairly open and they're left, or very left, but the fact is now this is like war. When the US president declared war over, he upended consensus to see off threats of Iran and ISIS. Really? Who else is always on about Iran, eh? Well, it's up to you to figure that out. And also, the Guardian again, Trump plans to pull thousands of troops out of Afghanistan, you see. The withdrawal could pave the way towards a second 9/11, it says. Somebody else in a cave might just dream this up, Warns Trump ally Lindsey Graham, who's actually his allegiances is elsewhere, you might say. But then so must be the Guardian, see. Everything today is owned by intelligence agencies. And it says Trump orders full withdrawal of US troops from Syria. I don't believe it myself, because I've seen these articles before when it's going to happen, and then they'll put more in, supposedly, in the next article. Or they would tell you they were there all along, yada, yada, yada. Now here's an article just 2 weeks before, this stuff about Syria, and it says, no withdrawal date in sight for US troops in Syria. And that's from Jane's Defence Weekly. So as I said, they go back and forth, so you have to wait and see what's going to happen. Because the big military-industrial boys never stop what they're doing. And this is irrespective of the guys doing the fighting. The big forces behind them that own everything and plan the future, they never give up things. They never do it. They might go back to proxy warriors with mass mercenaries. They'll call some other name again. But who knows? We'll have to wait and see. And France prepares last resort chemical weapon that can be smothered around Paris to keep yellow vest rioters away from key buildings as anti-Macron protests continue. It's across the whole of France, so it isn't just Paris. And this stuff too will kill a lot of people, although it's really a mass concentrated, much more concentrated form well, they say it's a debilitating powder, and it's basically worse, much, much worse than just tear gas, basically. Hundreds of times more powerful and concentrated, and it will kill folk, obviously. So here's an interesting to see that chemical weaponry is now being threatened to be used on people inside their own countries who happen to be fed up using the vote because it gets nowhere, and being ruled over roughshod by the characters that are brought in to rule over them on behalf of the real rulers of the planet. Also, the police apparently are having strikes over in France, at least in Paris. And some of the headlines will say, well, they're planning to join the yellow jackets, but who are the protesters? But in reality, I think it's because the police are using it as a chance to get more money and less hours because they're overworked, overstretched with all the crime they now have and nothing to do with the yellow vest, basically. But they're fed up with what's been happening there too. It's the same as all Europeans are at the moment. So they're threatening to join the protesters. Facebook again, constantly more stuff comes out about their data sharing deals exposed. It makes no difference because most of the folk, especially young folk, will keep using it thinking they'd never get. It's the same with pills or drugs, They'd never give us that unless it was okay. If you tell them about the dangers of something, they'd never do that to us. They really believed under socialism they're being taken care of by experts. So Facebook can't be that bad, And they won't know it until, maybe 20 years from now that everybody who's putting stuff up there and using it they'll start to use it for blackmailing so that you'll do what you're told. If you start to cause a problem or you question too much, they'll use all the stuff that you put up there on you and threaten to expose it again or make it more widely known in mainstream media. There's 1,000 ways to blackmail you. That's why privacy was awfully important, because tyrannical governments tend to use the data on you down the roads that they've gleaned upon you. That's why politicians do what they're told too. Most of them are blackmailable. And they constantly accept these little trips and so on to different places where perhaps they shouldn't, and all the little things that go with it. And FBI plans rapid DNA network for quick database checks on arrestees. What a world, what a future, eh? And of course, two companies are working together to leverage spatial data generated by iRobots, Robovax, it's called, Robovax. And that's Google wants to improve your smart home with, the room maps and all that. Sure they do. It's to help you. You might not know where your kitchen is. You really have to know that, don't you? And of course, everyone knows about Alexa. The recent little revelations where it's all told in a kind of sexy, humorous way that Alexa talks murder to children. And it's really a learning program that Alexa's got built into it. Isn't this funny? Really? But read their article and how this stuff is collecting incredible data about everyone who uses it. And it'll all be part of the same thing, as I say. Or you're not supposed to say this or think that. Just like Demolition Man, bing, bing, out comes a little fine every time you do it. And Bertrand Russell's the idea too. You won't be able to pay your rent because your credits won't come in that week. It's all coming down the pipe, folks. And everybody thinks it's presented as a fun thing. It's not fun. I'll put these articles up for anybody who wants to see about it. And Ticketmaster invests in facial recognition technology company. Of course, this stuff's all been used in China for a long time. They even had exposés coming out of China showing us how they've got incredible facial recognition, instant stuff on the streets and railroads and stuff like that. So it's the same stuff, probably the same companies involved in it and so on. That's all I can really manage to get up right now, except to say that homeless deaths are up 24% over 5 years in Britain. Isn't that progress, isn't it? And of course they won't have until the end of winter. And even then they'll try and scam it down a bit because of the amount of folk are dying because they can't afford the fuel for their winter to heat their own homes. And now that's normal. Thousands every year, that's normal. But we can give billions across the planet for things you haven't even heard of and things that got nothing to do with what you vote people in for. Because you see, the system that exists above it all is alien to anything that you have been trained to imagine. That's why it manages to do it so well. Now remember what I said about common sense. Common sense means when you hear the stuff that's happening, don't crash yourself. Don't come down and say, oh my God, the sky's falling. Just understand it and use common sense and cope with it. And of course there's certain things you can do. There's many things you can do. And you can stop putting out so much information as well, for those who want to, and handing it free to other organizations that are really ruling over you. Because as I say, privacy is very, very important. Very important. As countless folk have found out over centuries, and some of them pretty recent too. That's the reality of it. So as I say, don't obsess over things until it crashes you. News and understanding of real facts of what's happening is awfully important. It's a basic survival principle, isn't it? So don't let it crash you. Take care of yourselves. We'll shortly be into a Christmas then, and then into the new year. And let's go forward with some understanding of what can be done, even personally. So I'm Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, where it's really freezing, naturally, because it's winter. So it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.